Okay, now moving on to part 3, which is where we're going to look at how I applied this cognitive readiness and demand theory to creating some what I call bridging lessons. This is again the 30 original case lessons showing the entry point to each lesson and its cognitive load, the target of the main episodes of the lesson, and some of the more stretching activities. And as you can see that throughout, when a reasoning schema, for instance, variables, is being addressed, there's a steady climb through the 30 lessons. But when a new schema is introduced, usually there's a dropping down of the target level. And this happens throughout the program. And this allows there to be space for progression. I thought that needed to be taken into account when I was designing lessons that would continue the case process after lesson 30. That would be into year 9. Now, the lessons that I developed that I'm talking about here are in the area of temperature and heat, thermodynamics, thermal physics. And again, this is information from the curriculum analysis taxonomy that Sharon Adey produced. And it gives a real focus of where to stretch students, especially when you know at what level they've tested it using the science reasoning tasks. And it gives real indication of how to push them up this conceptual level through the idea of a very simple conflated temperature and heat to the idea of just a one-to-one simple temperature model. The misconception that many students have of heat as substance or cold as substance that many I've taught have, and all the way through to be pushing them using the language of dynamic and statistical kinetic theory. Now, a big influence on my thinking in this as well was Tamer Amin from the American University of Beirut, who is, he's got huge amounts of psycholinguistic, he's a cognitive psychologist, but he's particularly interested in science education and the use of language in conceptual change. And so informed, I really suggest reading him about how the metaphors and analogies we use can either hinder or actually promote conceptual change. We'll see that in action in the experiments. Just to summarize his views, again, it was very interesting coming from a completely different viewpoint than Sharon Adey, a different kind of research tradition. It overlapped so much what he found that by looking at transcripts of student discussion, this linear temperature concept at an early level, and then the substance idea, and then a few students at the end of secondary education moving much more to a dynamic and statistical systems approach. I thought this was really valuable insights, and in particular, as a teacher, using case methodology of how to help mediate student thinking. It reminded me very much of the way I learned German as a second language, that I would always ask the German teachers I worked with, I would always talk with them in German, and they would not point out my mistakes, they would not repeat my mistakes, but they would always mediate by actually continuing the conversation using the correct modeling. And I thought that was a very interesting concept. We're aiming for students, no matter what level they're at, to move towards this dynamic statistical systems thinking. Tamer Amin criticized a lot of the kind of secondary and early college textbooks that they kept using the substance concept, where they should have been moving much more towards dynamical statistical systems. Let's see how that plays out in the lessons. So I designed these lessons that have got these episodes that are called B for bridging, that again drop down to quite a low cognitive level. This is at the start of year 9. The students have had the preparation, they're familiar with the Piagetian schemata words. We've talked about concepts of equilibrium, we've talked about models. And so these lessons were designed to bridge onto that, to assume and keep on practicing the language of thinking, but within now the curriculum context of concepts of temperature and of heat transfer. The bridging also is, these lessons were designed to be about thermal equilibrium, where a reminder of lesson 28 and 30 in the CASE curriculum are dynamical physical equilibria, the uphill and down dale, as you can see, 28, which is to do with the 4 variables, to do with the different masses of the objects, the transport objects that come into equilibrium, and also the slope of the roads that they're on. And then lesson 30 is to do with lever law equilibrium, to do with balancing moments. So we have, again, 4 variables at work. We have, and relationships between these variables. So that was a starting point to focus back to the thinking that they'd done at the end of their case, at the end of year 8. So this bridging happened like this. These are very simple experiments, which is a major feature of CASE anyway, that it's not a hands-on inquiry style. It's a highly focused experiments that are designed to create cognitive conflict, to promote conceptual change. A very simple one was 2 equal volumes of water at different temperatures that would come in by a method of mixtures to equilibrium. And then the second episode would be different volumes, in this case a ratio of 2 to 1, at different temperatures. And this produces the kind of cognitive conflict where students with a very linear model of temperature, but no real concept that the mass or the amount of substance played a role. But there were students amongst the group who had that concept, which meant that cognitive conflict and social construction were really fruitful. Then it moves on to a much more challenging situation where we have 0 degrees Celsius water compared to 0 degrees solid ice. So back to the CASE methodology and how it applies here, that to create a cognitive conflict, we would always do some concrete preparation, getting the students to focus on what the key variables were. And the idea that we have volume as a variable or mass as a variable, that we have temperature beginning, we have temperature difference, and then we have temperature changes. And so a lot of the concrete preparation was making that clear so the students could make predictions, put forward explanations, which again is an opportunity to hear what their conceptual model of temperature and heat is. And in small group discussions, there would be a lot of cognitive conflict, and the results from the experiments would further keep that cognitive conflict alive. The social construction, throughout my application of CASE, and that's why I believe testing the students to know what Piagetian levels, I would always organize group work to maximize the range of cognitive conflict. So you would have students who would be arguing using their simple temperature model, simple linear model. There would be other students who have got a substance-based or caloric model of varying degrees of maturity, and occasionally some students who are already starting to connect to more kinetic models. So that's the pedagogy of CASE was applied within the conceptual change model specific to this curriculum area of thermal equilibrium. I've developed this in other areas like electricity, particle motion, diffusion, photosynthesis, but this is just an example of looking at the language demands that are highly content specific, domain specific, added together with the case language of creating cognitive conflict, of looking at variables, looking at equilibrium, what's needed. And so a constant rehearsal of the thinking demands. Okay, if you want to have a look at these lessons, they're online at these links. You can download the presentation. And we've been making an attempt to support case methodology, and I've put them on there. Any feedback will be really welcome. And so to summarize, CASE has produced a way of measuring the SRT, well validated across a wide range, so you can understand and you can either look at previous research or you can do this in your own classroom. I highly recommend it's worth the time to start before case lessons and towards the end of the case 30 lessons to do at least 2 of the SRTs. They are very much like a case lesson. They're very much within the skill set of a science teacher. You effectively demonstrate while they fill in the testing form. That's produced this mass of data to be able to look at the range across your school, across your department, compared to national norms. And also the CAT enables us to select and organize our curricula into a set of lessons that will bridge between and beyond the case lessons. Here's an example for the international school I worked at. We effectively built the first year of secondary program with lessons that were bridged in between the 15 case lessons we did with the year 7, or what we call grade 6. We continued with that all the way up to the pre-IGCSE that we used to do, and then we continued it when we did the International Baccalaureate Middle Years program. So this is an application of the principles of CASE, also the research about conceptual understanding. And I think the 2 of them can be well worked together. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think that evaluation is really important. So if you can give me some feedback by clicking the link. If you want to download the presentation, it's there. And if you want to connect, there are my details. Thank you very much for your time.